Randa. Good morning, colleagues. It's really my pleasure to be here today to be able to deliver this training on small island developing states. Actually, I would like to start with my own experience in studying those countries. I started to work on those countries when I was an economist in the Debt and Financing for Development branch here in UNCTAD. And as soon as I joined the branch, I immediately realized how outstanding the issue of debt sustainability was for those countries, with very high levels of debt burdens, very high level of debt service, and very high volatility, meaning that SIDS country could be fined for many years, and one climate event would hit, and all of a sudden, it would be in the very red with considering triggering debt default mechanism or debt restructuring. I'm sorry, but I don't see my slides on the screen. Should I, yeah. If someone can help, like, yeah, thank you. I was saying that, so I was working on those issues. I was working on debt issues on SIDS, and oh, I lost the thread of what I was saying. Sorry about that. And so little by little, I started to get my head around actually all aspects of economic and social development in SIDS to better understand actually the roots of debt sustainability, also the repercussions that it had on SIDS. And I became passionate on those countries, and now today I'm here to deliver this training. So SIDS actually are countries that are really challenging many strong economic beliefs, many cliché or stereotypes that we could have from our background, our experience with some economic school thoughts. They also challenge actually the way we measure economic progress with the conventional macroeconomic indicators, as well as well-being. And as you may know, SIDS are known as the canary in the coal mine. So I had a little illustration on my PowerPoint that is coming. So this is a trope that is used by SIDS themselves. And thank you so much. And this is an unfortunate nickname, but at the same time, it says a lot on the lessons that other countries can and should learn from SIDS. SIDS are countries that are among the first to be impacted by climate disasters, to be affected by financial crises, and any type of exogenous shocks in our global economy today, which we will see increasingly recurrent. At the same time, SIDS are also very proactive in the international arena. They're very active in the multilateralism system. They are putting forward many solutions in the area of climate finance, in the area of climate vulnerabilities, resilience, as well as finance. And those solutions that they put forward are often beneficial to all developing countries. So all in all, SIDS are a subject of study that is interesting as such, but it's also a subject that we could use as well to better understand and find solutions for other developing countries. So there will be 4 main moments in my presentation. The first one, I will define who SIDS are. I think it's important to really delimit actually who we are talking about. So there will be 2 answers, a short answer and also a long answer that I will use to walk you through actually the current challenges that SIDS face, especially in light of UNCTAD's mandate, especially those issues that you will be exposed to here in Geneva when it comes to SIDS. Then I will introduce the UNCTAD strategy for SIDS, and I will close my presentation with a concrete example of project that my division and my branch on productive capacities is implementing to support SIDS in the area of productive capacities. So let's move on with the question of who SIDS are. So as I said, there is a short answer. So actually there is a list of SIDS. It's a list of 39 countries, which is maintained by the United Nations Office of the High Representative for LDCs, LLDCs, the landlocked countries, and SIDS. And you can find this list on the website. I just shared on my slides the link. And it is important to know that this list is really the reference in all UN institutions. So wherever you will hear or you will read about SIDS in a new UN agency, it refers to that list of countries. But you need to be careful because in other international organizations outside the UN, there might be slight differences, slight nuances about who we are referring to about using this terminology or similar terminologies, as well as in the academic literature. So you have to really be careful about that. So the category SIDS was first recognized in 1992 during the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development. And it doesn't mean that before that the issues faced by SIDS were just ignored by the UN. But if you review the old documents, you will find different terminologies such as island developing economies, small developing economies, and back in the days we didn't know really which countries we were talking about. So it is really an achievement to have an official and consistent list of SIDS. So this list was also preceded by the creation of the Alliance of Small Island Developing States, also known as AOSIS, in 1990. And this is the political alliance through which SIDS mostly voice their concern here at the UN, also in other international organizations. And it is important to highlight that SIDS in general are examined through the lens of three main regions: the Caribbean, the Pacific, and the African, Indian Ocean, and South China Sea region. So this last region is less homogeneous than the Caribbean and the Pacific because it covers a larger geographic areas, and also it doesn't have a strong cultural and historical identity, and there's not as many actually regional institutions that are like representing this very huge region here in the global system. So it's interesting to compare quickly with other vulnerable countries here in the UN, including LDCs and LLDCs. So SIDS, they do have their own conference. You have the list here on the right-hand side of my slide. So the first one took place in 1994 in Barbados, and the last one, the last iteration took place in 2024, so last year. And it led to the ABAS document, which is now the most updated roadmap for the UN to support SIDS. So we have to say that the same way as LDCs and landlocked countries, progress has been very slow for SIDS. Many challenges, issues raised as soon as in the 90s, which were not properly sorted out. So in the ABAS document, you will find two types of issues. The issues that we are calling emerging, so the new challenges that we will discuss later on in my presentation, but also the enduring challenges, so all the unsolved challenges that are persistent in SIDS. As opposed to LDCs, there is no definition. Actually, there is no quantitative criteria to define SIDS. This is an important point. And there is no graduation mechanism. So the list has virtually remained unchanged since its inception, except that Bahrain actually decided to exit the list in 2023. So the main principle is self-identification in consultation with UN OLS. And we'll see actually that is also, this principle of self-identification is also highly based on an identity of vulnerability and resilience that is shared across all SIDS. Here, actually, I wanted to walk you through the list because I wanted to highlight that even though SIDS have a strong identity in the UN, we should not undermine the fact that it is a heterogeneous group, including, with respect to the acronym. So if we take the acronym of Small Island Developing States, we'll see that actually the reality is more nuanced than what the acronym can convey. So I cannot show the list here, but so if we consider states, so the last term of the acronym, you'll see that in the list includes also overseas territories from other member states, so countries that are not considered states as such by the UN. So in UNCTAD, we don't work directly with the overseas territories, but we will work with the member states in which those territories would be, because those territories also share actually the same vulnerabilities and the same identity as the states. Regarding developing, SIDS are a very heterogeneous group, much more than LDCs and LDCs. So you have countries who are LDCs such as Haiti, Guinea-Bissau, and many more. And at the same time, you have Singapore, which is often presented as a success economy from East Asia. But all countries do actually affirm their identity as SIDS. Regarding the term island, you will also see that in the list there is some countries are not islands, like Belize. So the idea is because they are sharing, they're not islands, but they are low-lying lands, and they're also sharing, we will see, some common characteristics with islands, in addition to some cultural and historical backgrounds. And last, smallness. This is also an aspect that we will spend a bit time. So there is a continuum of small in this list. So there are like very, very small countries like Tuvalu, and there is countries that are, like Tuvalu is like 10,000 inhabitants, but we also have in this list Haiti or the Dominican Republic, which accounts for like 11 million of people. So the way that the challenges affect SIDS will also depend. So SIDS are not like small and islands and developing and states. It's more like a halo. It's like a combination of different vulnerabilities stemming from those four characteristics. Okay, so as I said, there is a strong identity of SIDS, but still there is some heterogeneity. So how should we characterize SIDS? And actually, in the history of studying small islands and developing states, there is a framework that was used, which is the vulnerability and resilience framework. So it's used by academics, but it's also used by policymakers. I shared actually here some papers for you to get more information about this framework.
So there is like two sides. So there is the vulnerability side and the resilience side. And I'm going to walk you through the two sides to better understand what they refer to. So regarding vulnerabilities, so as I said, SIDS are very vulnerable, and this primarily stem from three structural characteristics, which are like the geography, the smallness, and the remoteness. So SIDS actually display very hazardous geographies. So most of them are located on plate boundaries or very near plate boundaries, which are found within the tropics. Here on the right-hand side, you see a graph showing that most SIDS are located within the Tropic of the Cancer and the Capricorn. And this location actually cures a very high exposure to many climate disasters. So for all islands, we note tropical cyclones, storm surge, flooding, and earthquakes caused by tectonic activity. And for the volcanic islands, on top of that, we also have to take into consideration volcanic hazards, landslides, earthquakes, but this time due to volcanic activity. SIDS are actually impacted by climate disaster in a very disproportionate manner. So they represent actually 2/3 of the countries that face the highest losses as a consequence of environmental hazards. So this is overrepresentation. Impacts of climate change are growing and are becoming more complex, and there is like a huge literature on this topic. Just to give you some idea of how much loss it represents, we estimate that every year tropical cyclones are causing a loss of $839 million of damage in the Caribbean and $178 million in the Pacific. And according to a study by UNDR, SIDS are expected to lose 20 times more of their capital stock each year as a result of climate disaster than Europe and Central Asia. Now the second vulnerability that is shaping the identity of SIDS is smallness. And there is a very large literature in economic developments about the impact and the adverse effects of smallness. It's important to note that smallness is not like an absolute concept. It's a relational concept. The country is always smaller than another one. And smallness has a double impact. First, on the supply side of the economy. So it really narrows down productive bases. Countries would have just a few options for industries. They would face very limited natural resources, although some of the SIDS that I mentioned are like commodity exporters. And on top of that, the labor markets would be very small, really reducing actually the possibilities. So all those aspects, they do really restrict economies of scale. They make the production cost very high, and they increase dependence on imports and external suppliers. There is also another aspect, so on the demand side, that is often overlooked. As you may know, demand is very important for development, and smallness do induce a very limited consumer base and triggers actually reduce aggregate demand, and it has adverse effects on investments, also on innovation, and most of the firms in SIDS are really struggling to grow beyond niche scales, and SIDS governments in general face smaller tax revenues, and this would reduce their fiscal capacity. So together, the adverse effect on supply side and the demand side makes SIDS very exposed to external shocks. They make them very dependent on trade, also on international aid, and they make them less able to diversify and absorb the disruptions which are inherent in the global economy. So those issues actually they do apply to other countries. Of course, a country like Ghana would have less option than a country like China in terms of economies of scale, in terms of effects, the supplier of like demand, etc. Also, it's very hard to quantify smallness. In the literature, there are many metrics that are used: population, surface area, etc. But in the SIDS literature, in the small states literature in the 90s, which was also covering European states, developed economies. So the identity of SIDS was mostly built on the fact that their vulnerability due to smallness was overriding their existential condition. And there is this quote from an academic expert, Streeton, that is well known: "We know a small state when we see one." Quickly on the right-hand side, I just put like a graph cross-tabulating the population and the environmental vulnerability index, and we see that the higher the population, the lesser the vulnerability in the area of environmental issues. So the size does matter, and this is part of the identity of SIDS. Now, remoteness. So remoteness refers to geographic isolation. So it's in general measured either from major global markets or trading routes. And there is interesting statistics produced by UNCTAD that shows that a citizen from a SIDS country has to travel on average 371 kilometers to the closest non-SIDS country, in comparison with a distance of only 8 kilometers for a citizen in a non-SIDS country to go to the nearest neighbor. So you see how big is the magnitude of the differences between an inhabitant in SIDS and an inhabitant in a continental country. Remoteness really induces increased transport and logistic costs that make imports expensive and exports less competitive. And most SIDS rely on few costly air and sea connections, and this tends to fuel inflation and also limit tourism flows. Remoteness also have an impact on human capital. So it creates more difficulty to access education, healthcare, technology, especially when those dimensions require specialized services or specialized supplies that needs to be imported from abroad. It also isolates actually the populations culturally and politically, limiting the participation in regional or global institutions, which was really a concern for SIDS after decolonization. Remoteness is also responsible for delaying a disaster response, and it creates difficulty in mobilizing international assistance. It's important also to highlight that this issue of remoteness affects differently the three different regions that I listed in the beginning of my presentation. So in the Pacific, this is like the most extreme effect. So most of them are like thousands of kilometers from major markets, and this leads to extreme transport costs, dependence on aid, and also it has many implications for internet, ICTs, as well as energy connectivity. Caribbean SIDS are not as remote because they are like closer to continental America, but they still face high shipping costs and limited airlink for smaller, especially for those islands which are the smallest. The Atlantic Indian Ocean region is moderately remote, but it is often very dependent on tourism and trade through just a few key ports, and the isolation can still cause supply bottlenecks and high import prices, as we saw during the COVID-19 pandemic. So now let's move on to the other side of the vulnerable resilience framework, which is the resilience, and which refers to the ability to cope with and overcome constraints. So this resilience aspect is very linked with, surprisingly, what we call inherent advantages of small size. And this includes the ability of SIDS to engage in niche forms of enclave capitalism, for example, financial services, tourism, or sovereignty sales. So as you can see in the chart, which is cross-tabulating resilience index and vulnerability index, which are two sub-indexes of the multi-dimensional vulnerability index from the UN, you see that many SIDS are in the right top quadrant, meaning that they have very high vulnerability and at the same time high resilience. So you see there Singapore, Barbados, Mauritius, etc. Although some are still in the left top quadrant, like here you see Comoros and Sao Tome and Principe, meaning that they have very high vulnerability but and low resilience. And this is often referred in the literature as a paradox, and it's exemplified by Singapore. You know, Singapore that you see here is very resilient. Is a very successful economies that have achieved a structural transformation, but at the same time it's very high in the vulnerability index. Also on the resilience, it's important also to highlight that some do nuance this resilience because of some potential statistical biases when using some per capita measures. You know, like because the population is very small, there are like some, and SIDS are always on the extreme tails of the distributions. It's really hard to compare actually the ratios, for example, of GDP per capita between like a very tiny island and a country which would stay in the standard size. Also, I wanted to highlight this resilience because it has some effects here in global governance, especially on special and differential treatments. It explains also why the differences that we note between LDCs and SIDS. So SIDS, since the 90s, they have been seeking special and differential treatment recognition based on their unique vulnerabilities, but with very mixed success. In the 90s, the focus was mostly on trade, and the category small vulnerable economies was created in WTO, but it had limited legal effect. And now SIDS do enjoy some special and differential treatment, but not as much as least developed countries. And the request for SDTs has also changed over the last decades, with more focus now in finance, including climate finance. They have been pushing for a multi-dimensional vulnerability index that I mentioned earlier to reform aid location. They have been advocating fairer financial terms, better access to financing for development, debt relief, and also they have been pushing for the establishment of innovative instruments to cope with climate change, like risk reduction, risk retention, or risk transfer instruments. They have been also engaging with IMF and World Bank to create tailored financing windows for resilience adaptation. And there is growing recognition among most international financial institutions and donors that the tools that we had to allocate financial assistance, concessional finance, such as GDP per capita, were not so adequate. And in many IFIs, this led to the creation of small state categories, which not necessarily the SIDS categories that we have in the UN. Also, it's important for you to know that, so there are like two terms referring now to this special and differential treatments, and it's so you will find the terminology special circumstances, mostly in environmental agreements, and the terminology special case, mostly in development documents in the UN and in other international organizations. Okay, I wanted to walk you through the timeline of SIDS development models. So just to show you how the resilience translates and has translated throughout the last decades. So SIDS are very dependent on the global environment. It is very critical to their development, and they managed to actually put together some strategies to survive. So they did better than developing countries, although we have to nuance that it doesn't mean that they converge. The success was not as expected for all developing countries except in East Asia after decolonization. But still, they managed to find the environment was to some extent enabling for them to be able to shape strategies and development models. And I think it's important to know them, to be able to reflect on which development model is adequate nowadays. Okay, let's start with the 70s, 80s. So in an era that qualified decolonization and waning preferences, so after decolonization, most states entered global institutions by joining the UN, the Commonwealth, also regional blocs. And in those years, there was a very reliance on preferential trade schemes, especially on products such as sugar, bananas, textiles, and especially with Europe and the US. And those arrangements were not just economic, they were reflecting a wider Cold War era politics, also reflecting post-colonial development cooperation, and they were really conveying the ideals of the new international economic order. But by the late 1980s, those preferential trade schemes started to get eroded, especially because of the acceleration of trade liberalization under the GATT and later on under the WTO. Then there was this turning point where shifts started to push for recognition of the structural vulnerabilities in global governance. Which take us to the 90s and 2000s. In an era of globalization and emergence of niche services. So globalization actually opened new pathways for SIDS beyond, the legacy of preference-based agriculture and aid dependence. And they managed to develop some niche service sectors, such as offshore finance, tourism, flag of convenience shipping, as well as sovereignty sales. For example, you see here in the 2000s, in the graph that I'm sharing with you on my slide, that the contribution of tourism to GDP is twice that of other developing countries in those years. So the graph is only showing 2000, 2010 because 2008, 2010, because those years are where we have consolidated data for all SIDS. But this would apply to 90s and 2000s. So many SIDS did relatively well compared with other developing countries, and this undermines actually claims for the special and differential treatment that I was discussing earlier, and vulnerability-based concessionality. Those years are also the years where SIDS started to organize as an institution with the creation of the Alliance of Small Island Developing States in 1990. And this era was marked by rising visibility of SIDS challenges when it comes to climate change and sustainable development, in a period where multilateralism was at its height and where there was a lot of optimism and sometimes maybe overconfidence in the promises of globalization. In the 2010, so there was a larger focus on the blue economy, oceans, and climate security. So oceans and the blue economy started to emerge as defining themes of SIDS diplomacy. So now you will see in many papers and documents the use of the terminology large ocean states, which is a reconceptualization of SIDS size, highlighting how they occupy actually often enormous and resource-rich maritime areas covered by their exclusive economic zones. Here you can see on the table that SIDS, the ratio of SIDS surface area to the EEZ area is 20 times bigger than that of other countries, which actually give you an idea of the potentialities of the exploitation of the EEZ. So there has been a lot of focus on fisheries governance, marine biodiversity, and sustainable tourism. The idea is really to balance economic opportunities with climate sustainability. Another important point in those years is the framing of climate change as a security issue. So in UN Security Council debates, in the Paris Agreement, in the COP processes. So it started with COP 2015 in Copenhagen, but it really took shape in the Paris Agreement. And in those years, SIDS have been pushing for financing mechanisms related to climate vulnerability, with the creation of the Green Climate Fund, as well as the loss and damage facility, for which SIDS have been very vocal. So quickly, just to try to project what will be the main sources of the upcoming development models for SIDS. So from the development strategies, from the academic literature, we expect that there will be a large focus on digitalization, AI, deep sea mining, and geoengineering. So SIDS are expecting many opportunities from those. They would like to be able to strengthen digital economies, to leverage fintech, remote services, AI-driven governance, and really those issues are very relevant and really transparent from the development document. At the same time, those areas carry some risks, such as digital divides in SIDS society, which is already present, cyber vulnerability, external control of data from global corporations, and also the rise of digital monopsonies and monopolies that can hamper actually the benefits that SIDS could have from the development of those sectors. They are like already emerging frontier issues, so we see already very strong debates on deep sea mining in the Pacific and Indian Ocean. Same on geoengineering, especially on those technologies relating to solar radiation management and carbon capture. And all those are coming with high stakes governance challenges. And now the question for SIDS is how to be able to shape norms in those areas and to avoid being rule takers later. And the question is how they can achieve this. Okay, now I'm going to spend some time on the current headwinds and economic challenges in SIDS. So especially on those areas here which are relevant to UNCTAD and which have been really of interest for SIDS. So as I said, we had this vulnerability resilience framework to think, to reflect about SIDS, and it had become the orthodoxy for SIDS, but it struggles to explain the shifts that we are facing today. And SIDS are now facing a critical juncture in their development, and it is actually mentioned in the Abbas document. So I'm just going to quote the Abbas document. A new context is emerging wherein the economic, social, and environmental, as well as geopolitical threats to the development of small island developing states are so great that they can only be ameliorated by a reinvigorated, enabling environment that gives meaningful effect to their sustainable development. So there are, as I said, there are threats to SIDS development and that are creating some concern. And there are three main threats, which are hyper-globalization, intensifying climate change, and rise of geopolitical tensions. So hyper-globalization is a term used here in UNCTAD, which refers to the phase of globalization marked by unprecedented acceleration of trade, financial flows, and corporate integration that occurred since the 90s. I can refer you to the UNCTAD flagship report, Trade and Development Report. And it was driven by market deregulation, very rapid reprivatization, and the retreat of the public sphere, which has diminished the state's regulatory and developmental role. And paradoxically, if globalization open new opportunities for SIDS, now this phase of hyper-globalization is restricting actually their options because it has an impact on their economic fragility. So most of them are undiversified economies, and they're really reliant on few exports like tourism or fisheries, and it makes them very exposed to external shocks. So it's an era where, as you can see, that we are seeing shocks after shock, be it in the financial realm or climate realm, etc. But it is very intrinsic to this phase of hyperglobalization. There is also this issue of rising market concentration, which is very relevant to SIDS. So the problem is like the dominance of a few global firms, which limit the competition. And the difference with previous decades is like now we are facing monopsonies that are having adverse effect on the labor markets, and that can also exacerbate inequality in SIDS society. So this is reflected in the tech sector, for which SIDS have a lot of hopes for their development. There we see there is a global concentration. You know, there's a big tech, and this constrains SIDS' capacity to build autonomous digital economies, but also the same in the blue economy. There are just a few firms who have the capacity actually to undertake deep sea mining, etc. So there is some questions about how SIDS can make benefits in this kind of market structure. The last issue for SIDS is reduced policy space. So with hyperglobalization, we see a shrinking, as I said, of the role of public authorities, and it's harder now to establish tools to support industries, to regulate investment, or to manage technology transfer, and this is exacerbated by these economies of scale. This, I think you know, we are in an era of intensifying climate change. So there are like rising climate threats. So for SIDS, it's documented now, also with data that there are more frequent and intense hurricanes, more frequent cyclones, sea level rise, coastal erosion, flooding, drought, coral bleaching, and the rise of infectious disease for many species. And SIDS have been really vocal about that, and they have led actually calls for strong climate actions, notably the 1.5 global warming limit. I'm trying to speed up because I'm not sure how much time left. 5 more minutes. How much? 5? Not much. I haven't started to speak about the UNCTAD strategy, but I'll try to wrap up. Another important threat is geopolitical tensions that we are seeing between larger states, and the threats it creates to multilateralism. So this changing geopolitical environment is questioning how enabling the global environment will continue to be for SIDS. Actually, there are 3 central norms of the post-war order. So the right to development, the sovereign equality, and the non-interference, which were really, really important for SIDS development, much more than other bigger countries, and in which SIDS had considerable autonomy to pursue development than is conventionally recognized or abandoned. And they, in those times, they could try something else, but they won't have this space anymore if those geopolitical tensions continue to intensify. So I'm going to try to wrap up those, just to go to the strategy. Those are the issues, the current issues that are here discussed in UNCTAD and Geneva, WTO, and that are really relevant and important for SIDS. First, the lack of economic diversification. As I said, SIDS only rely on a few sectors. And all those sectors, I'm not gonna, they are listed: service, like finance, offshore finance, tourism. They're all very vulnerable to the way the global economy is and the threats that I mentioned, and we saw it during the COVID-19. So it's really a source of concern, and the UNCTAD strategy was built in that sense to enable SIDS to increase their economic diversification. Debt distress, I started my presentation with that. SIDS are among the most vulnerable countries. So it's something that is highly discussed here. Another important area is access to official development assistance. Here there is some controversial issues between the donors and SIDS, but the main idea is like SIDS are calling for other eligibility criteria, and that's why the MVA was established here in the UN. Another important issue, current one, is the access to climate finance. As you know, SIDS are very low contributor to climate change, but they suffer the highest impacts. And they are really following actually and really pushing for some initiatives to increase climate finance, which is not enough for the moment. Maybe we'll discuss those issues during the Q&A session. So let's move to the UNCTAD strategy as such. So, you know, in this context, the strategy was established by SIDS and UNCTAD, by UNCTAD SG Rebecca Gritzman, and it was established by the missions here of SIDS in Geneva. It shares a lot in common with the Abbas document, although it was issued a few months before, but we already had the feedback from the regional preparatory meetings. And UNCTAD is the first institution to have a SIDS strategy, and other UN institutions are following suit, for example, UNDP. So the strategy is really building on the long-standing support and partnerships of UNCTAD with SIDS, and they are like, it really follows the three pillar functions of UNCTAD. So UNCTAD will, and provides policy research and analysis through data, papers, reports. It will also support countries with intergovernmental deliberation and advocacy, for example, in the case of the MVI, or like the establishment of the loss and damage facility. And the third pillar is technical cooperation and capacity building. And all my colleagues here will give concrete examples. This I think I will just leapfrog it. We might come back to it. So there are like 10 pillar interventions. So my division, the division for Africa and least developed countries and special programs, is overseeing the work on SIDS, but the work is mainstream throughout all the divisions. So those 10 pillar intervention match actually all the divisions of UNCTAD. And so the idea is to really have like a synchronized actions and converge into the same outcomes. So for example, the first is building productive capacities. This is like the area of my branch, but we're also collaborating with other division and other teams. So I don't have time to walk you through the 10, but I think you will have a sense of from my colleagues. Yes, this I will skip because I would like to show you actually the work that we do on productive capacities. So in my team, we are responsible for a project to support Caribbean countries to strengthen the productive capacities. And it's a project that is really aligned with the Abbas, which emphasizes productive capacities in paragraph 17, 21, 23, and 25. The Abbas also calls for capacity building, for data governance, and for the elaboration of holistic productive capacities development programs and national productive capacities gap assessments. So the project is also really following UNCTAD strategy for SIDS, which addresses gaps in productive capacities and also trying to tackle this issue of economic diversification. And it's all aligned with other global frameworks like the 2030 agenda, etc., that all actually mentioned productive capacities as a key area for development. So the objective is to strengthen and green productive capacities in selected Caribbean SIDS with the goal of boosting just transitions that align with the unique needs of SIDS and advancing economic transformation. So initially we had a budget of $900,000, but it was reduced down by 20% due to the UN financial crisis. And we are working with 4 beneficiary countries: Antigua and Barbuda, Dominican Republic, Trinidad and Tobago, and Jamaica. The time span of the project is 2025-2028, and there is a website. I just shared the link, so you can go and you have all the information on where we stand and where we're going. So the key outcomes is to first strengthen national statistical capacity of countries. So governments will have better tools and better data, better expertise to be able to measure productive capacities, which is really critical to SIDS. So here in UNCTAD we have the PCI, we work, so it's the Productive Capacities Index. So the idea is there is two work streams. First one, to improve data missingness, because SIDS are more affected than other countries, especially on those categories that are really key to them, such as transport, energy, ICTs, human capital. So we are helping SIDS build their statistical capacity and be able to report actually those data to international pipelines. And we're also creating a satellite SIDS PCI. So satellite is like a complementary index that we will use in addition to the main index to really focus on those issues that are specific to SIDS. So we're redesigning within this project, the SIDS, the PCI. For example, we are looking at more on financial issues. We are looking more on transport issues, kind of like try to grasp actually the issues that are of interest for SIDS. And then this is a nested project. Once we have the tools, we will, in consultation with countries, we will work on gap assessments, really highlight for each country the strengths, the weaknesses, bring other ministries together to have a dialogue on productive capacities. And then the third part of the project is really to design a holistic program. So based on the gap assessment that was made, so we select a few categories, few dimensions, few areas where there some gaps were key, or like some binding constraint that would unlock some potential, and we design a program with the countries. Okay, I give you a flavor of all that. So regarding the holistic program, the idea is afterwards, UNCTAD would also support countries for fundraising to implement the holistic program. It's something that we're already doing with African countries. In general, the program is for many years, maybe 5 to 7 years, and it requires some resources. And there is a follow-up here in UNCTAD. We're doing it with Angola. There's a lot of documentation on UNCTAD website, and soon with Mozambique as well. And the idea also of the division is to create a center of excellence in SIDS for productive capacities that is mentioned actually in the UNCTAD strategy. Okay, I think I'm gonna, just to let you know that we are now like hardly working with the countries on the PCI. So you have the timelines here. It's very interesting work actually to understand actually the roots of the issues with data. And we are going to organize a regional expert meeting in February in the Dominican Republic, where we bring experts from those countries, but also international experts to validate the satellite SIDS PCI. And hopefully we will also present the satellite SIDS PCI in New York with the mission in the course of next year. Okay, I'm just going to stop here just to let you know, if you want to know more about those overall challenges, I put there some resources, some policy papers from UNCTAD mostly, but also from other UN organizations, including UNCTAD strategy, and also academic readings that you can review about the long-standing structural issues. Thank you so much.